this is Trish, and welcome to my channel. Today we have a very special guest named Joshua, and I think you're going to find his story fascinating. He was actually fired from his teaching position for not using a student's preferred pronouns. And he is from England, but here in the United States, we're having a lot of discussions around this issue. So I thought it would be really interesting to have him on to share his story. So we'll go ahead and dive in. Joshua, can you just tell us, before we get to the part where you were fired, how did you enjoy your job as a teacher? Did you like it? Did you find it fulfilling? What was that whole experience like for you before things got a little crazy?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the channel, Trish. I appreciate the invitation and be very happy to speak about our love for teaching today. And yeah, so I got into teaching for that very reason, to serve the young people, to help them. My dad's a teacher, so I kind of saw that way of life, and thought that was something I'd like to pursue. And so had quite a successful initial part of my career. In the classroom, saw good results and had good rapport with students. That was never really the issue. The issue, as you alluded to, was based on my principled moral positions and things of that nature, so which obviously we can delve into. But no, things were going really quite well. I was happy as a teacher and enjoyed the role.
Right. So teaching was going well and things were moving right along. And then something happened that I'm sure kind of blew up your world. Can you kind of tell us anything you want to about the process of what happened in this situation?
Yeah. So without taking too long, I had a student come into my class from another class about halfway through the year, and she wasn't performing very well. So she actually came down a set. I don't know how it's structured in the US, but kind of down a level of sort of content that was being taught into my class. And, I treated her like any other student, and, in time, learned that the student wanted to be referred to as a boy. The name that she was using was sort of genderless, so it was difficult to know by the name. But having seen the student, I thought, well, she's definitely a girl, but she wanted to be referred to as a boy. So this was back in 2017. So I didn't really have any understanding at that point of, the notion of someone being transgender. It wasn't really something I had thought about or reasoned but I did feel principled enough not to go against what I felt was the truth, and so I just referred to the student by their name. And the student, didn't take very nicely to some of my Christian disposition, because within the school I was running a Christian union and was running a Bible club, and so the students knew I was a Christian, and this student that I mentioned found out about that, and so that kind of set up a bit of hostility between the two of us. But I didn't really know the extent to which there was hostility until, obviously, having now gone through court hearings and so on, where this student really didn't like my views. So anyways, I on one occasion referred to her in the classroom as a girl, and a complaint by the student's mother escalated really quickly to being sanctioned by the school and eventually dismissed for misconduct. And so that was the first time that I had experience going into the press, and the story sort of hit the international news, was on a big television program, and so that kind of was the beginning of my journey to eventually now being banned from teaching in classrooms around the UK.
If I remember reading the article correctly, didn't you say something like "great job, girls," kind of by accident at the time? Is that sort of what happens?
Yeah, it was her and a friend that she was sat next to, and I just said, "Well done, girls," to them. And like I say, this student took offense to this. Like I say, I really didn't at the time think that it was a big deal. I didn't really know about transgenderism and so on. And obviously this particular student had a real conviction that they weren't or didn't want to be referred to as a girl. And, obviously now reflecting back, and at the time, you can have conviction about things, but if it's not the truth, then so my approach to the matter was, well, what's right and what's true and what's those sorts of thoughts. And but I did actually try and act compassionately towards her, but as to not put a fox amongst the pigeons sort of thing, and try and just call her by her name. But that wasn't good enough for her. So it was really what manifested in the courts is it was a clash of ideas. It was her view against my view, and her view apparently usurps mine. There was also within the court documents a discussion that we had about marriage, and that I had with her and her friend, and they asked me about Christian marriage, and I said that I think that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that was another thing that was in the court documents. So again, a confrontation of ideas, and sadly, those particular ideas that I have, those Christian convictions I have, are not permissible, it seems, in classrooms in England. So yeah, it's been quite the adventure, but yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting to me because I'm not that old. I'm in my 30s. And I remember here in America, not that long ago, maybe anywhere between 2008 and maybe even 2012, even among what would be considered liberal or progressive in America, the political candidates would say things like marriage is between a man and a woman. They would say that they essentially were for civil unions and not marriage. And this was among the most progressive side, maybe 15 years ago. So in such a short period of time, the pendulum has swung so radically that even what former progressives and liberals believed is now considered one of the worst things that a person can say. And it's so interesting because one of the, three largest religions, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam, all of those religions would affirm that marriage is between a man and a woman. And so it's just fascinating that in such a short period of time, even saying something like that is considered the most bigoted and hateful and radical thing a person can say. And so I think there's probably a lot more people that are in your position that have reservations at a minimum about whether or not this ideology is helpful for children, but they feel terrified to say anything. And I know myself, I haven't really wanted to touch this issue at all because I know the second that I even suggest that maybe we should slow down a little bit with some of this ideology, I will be called every name in the book. And so I'm hoping that people that come to this conversation that maybe they are on the opposite side, that they can at least hear the rationale for what is considered the more conservative side of things, even though, as I mentioned, just 15 years ago, it was even the liberal side of things. So I know a lot of people will ask, why not just use the preferred pronoun? What's the harm? How would you answer that, either from your faith perspective or even just a practical perspective? What are some of your concerns about this movement as a whole?
Well, I think now I would say, I would probably be a bit stronger and even more strong and refer to her by the girl pronouns. And I think the reason I would do that is because I think affirming them in the other way is actually very dangerous and harmful to them. And I care about the young people I was helping, and I wouldn't want to put them in harm's way. So that would be what I'd say now. Is that very thing. I mean, people go through these big surgeries and the drugs, and they come out the other side and realize it hasn't helped them, and they want to go back, and then it destroys their life. And quite often, I mean, I've now since read into it, and quite often the just going through puberty, like naturally, people get over these sorts of feelings of feeling like they're in the wrong body and things like that. And so just let them go through the natural. That would be my position, if I was to be back in the classroom, is to do that. But someone might argue against me and say, well, it's affirming them, you're showing that you care for them, and that kind of argument. Well, yes, affirming them in the fact that they can get good results, that they can apply themselves, that they can have a good life, that that they're worth something, that those sorts of affirmations are fine, in my view. But it's to affirm them in a lie, that's not affirming, that's lying, and that's going to be harmful to them. And it's the truth that helps set people free, as the Bible says. Obviously about my Christian faith, but it's the truth that we must uphold in a society, because if lies start to have their way and sort of rule us, then it ends up being chaos. And obviously you're on the front line of the culture front lines when you're in the classroom, if you're teaching, because you're kind of setting the precedent for what is right and what is wrong. You're a responsible figure, and a public figure almost. And obviously usually it's not to my extent, it's just like the kids that you teach know you, and but in any sense, you have to be a role model for them. And so in so doing, you got to uphold the truth. So anyways, that would be my position.
Yeah, it's definitely understandable. And I think kind of the pronoun issue is almost a gateway issue, because it could start with saying, okay, I affirm their pronouns, but then that can move to, okay, maybe a biological male is now allowed to go into the female's locker room. And then that moves from the locker room to now maybe a biological male is allowed to be on female sports teams. And then that moves to, well, the biological male is taking puberty blockers and is changed forever bodily. And then that tends to move to, once that trajectory starts, to essentially a person having gender reassignment surgery, maybe as soon as they turn 18. And so I think what people fail to realize in this conversation is it's not just about what words you use. There's a kind of a whole pipeline that occurs once young people get on this path. And it's has such a short history, at least, in the Western world, that I think we haven't seen the results yet. But even from this tiny little window, we're already starting to hear stories, like you mentioned, about people having regrets, people thinking about even suing their doctors and their counselors and saying, why did you tell me this? And I've heard it, thrown out as a common psychology fact that the human brain doesn't even develop fully into the late 20s. And so that's why, at least, I don't know how it is in the UK, but, here we have age limits on drinking and smoking and joining the military. There's at least kind of an 18 to 21 window where there's a lot of things you're not allowed to do. And so I do think that it's peculiar that suddenly people are saying that very, very young children have the capacity to consent to life-altering procedures being done. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but at least here in America, there's been a lot of debates about teachers not being allowed to even tell parents if a child is socially transitioning in the classroom. And we've had cases come up here in the United States where if a parent did not affirm their child's chosen gender identity, that child could be removed and put into child protective services. So I do think it's important to talk about these issues and for people to have the big picture in mind, because at least what I see all the time on the internet when I watch videos about this is people just say, just respect the kid, just call them what they want to be called. What's the big deal? But the big deal is it's not just about a word, it's about an entire life path. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, oh yes, agree fully, agree completely. I mean, the one extra thing I would add is it's been a bit of I would argue, behind the scenes, a propaganda campaign by the big pharma and so on, who want to, sell their gender affirming care, and the medical pharma beast, that they don't care about people's lives, they just care about the bottom line. And some people have to stand up and say, no, that, our lives are important and precious and worth preserving and fighting for. And, so that, yeah, but I agree with you completely that, there should be much more serious restrictions for this particular thing.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I kind of want to talk about the faith-based side of this because I think that that can be a whole nother can of worms, but it's a serious discussion both here in the United States and in Britain because we have, similar ideological principles that there's freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Normally, that speech can't be compelled. Normally, that a person doesn't have to go against their conscience to do their job. And so I'm just kind of curious. I'm thinking of audience members that might find this video and say, what's the big deal about calling a guy a girl or vice versa? Why does God even care? How would you answer that from a faith perspective?
Well, I think God cares because he cares about each one of us, and he doesn't want us to go against the way he's created us. He doesn't want us to do things that will hurt us both physically and emotionally. And so that's why he has his laws in place, a bit like a dad or a mum. There are rules in the house, and the reason you have those rules is so that your children don't hurt themselves, and you want what's best for them. You love them and you want them to prosper in your house. You want them to be happy and at peace. And why do you then set the rules? It's not to take away the peace and the joy, it's to nourish it. That's what God does for us. He's given us his law, but he knows that humanity is sinful and goes against his ways and his laws, and so he's provided an option for those that do that, which is everyone, which is to put your hope in Jesus. So Jesus came and as the Son of God and sacrificed himself on the cross, and that sacrifice is the thing that makes us right with God. Should we receive that sacrifice and that offering and hope in Jesus's death for the sake of our sins, and then hope in Jesus's resurrection for the future and for eternal life. So that's sort of in a nutshell a bit about how I would approach it from a biblical worldview. So obviously the student in my classroom wasn't a Christian, so her worldview of course is, well, I want to do this and I'm the God of my own life, let me get on with it. And obviously as a Christian I wouldn't hold her hand and pull her away from some medicine or some clinic or whatever. Obviously if it was my own daughter, I would obviously, there might be a different approach. But a student, doing that, I would very sadly, I would try and warn them. But that's why my position, I said, is a bit stronger now than it was in the classroom. My position now is, well, I would probably say, no, I'm not going to do that, and be a bit more forthright about it, as to warn them about the dangers.
Yeah, definitely. I just kind of want to help people understand that, at least from the Christian worldview, it's not about hating the person or being bigoted or all of the accusations. It's truly from a position of love and concern for the person. And as you mentioned, even scientifically and statistically, it's been shown over and over again that kids that have genuine struggles with gender dysmorphia, they tend to grow out of that at like about a 92 or 93% rate just by going through puberty. And so people that have the side of concern just want to give those kids the best chance that they have to have a happy life. And if they decide, when they're 18, 19, 25, that they want to stay on the path that they're on, then that is absolutely their choice. But I think a lot of people want to warn that it really is a different scenario for children, that we have to be taking care of children and not following their lead in this specific instance. And so I'm kind of curious, kind of switching over to talk more about the personal impact all this has had on you, because I watched some of your interviews on YouTube and I was appalled at how mean people were to you. And I couldn't believe it. And so what has that felt like? Because being on the internet, I feel like I've gotten a teeny tiny little taste of what it can feel like to just feel hated and called names and just ripped to shreds. So what has that felt like for you?
Yeah, I think sometimes it can affect you, but I think on the whole, I have a worldview where, I live for God, and so he's the one I'm trying to please. And so, everything else is like water off a duck's back. I also have very good parents who always have affirmed, my mum and dad have affirmed me in my skills. And so, in part that's led to the formation of me as a man. And so, yeah. And I've done some street preaching, and, you do get some interesting comments when you're doing that sort of thing. So look, I just kind of I've moved on, and I've had to try and figure out how to now look after my family and things, without being in the classroom. So
Wow.
yeah.
And so, do you have a desire to go back to teaching in England, or have they just demolished your desire to even want to go back at this point?
I did enjoy the time in the classroom, and maybe one day I will do that again. But I'm enjoying life outside of the classroom, the opportunities in business and entrepreneurship, and I've enjoyed learning all of those skills and applying them. And you kind of in the free market, you get rewarded for your skills, if that makes sense. In the classroom, you get paid your £1,000 or $50,000, and it doesn't matter how good you are, you don't get any. But obviously in the free market, if you spend time on something and you're consistent, and you're good at what you do, then people reward, the market that rewards you. And so I'm enjoying that side. I never, had I not been kicked out of the classroom, I probably wouldn't have ever learned any of the things I now know. So it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say. I still have, there is the appeal there of just being able to help people, and that's kind of a pure way of living, isn't it?
Well, it sounds like you're doing well in spite of everything. And I'm just curious, what kind of advice would you give to somebody that is kind of in a similar position now that you were in a few years ago? Because I've seen at least maybe somewhere between 5 to 10 cases in the United States, even in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, of similar things where teachers are getting fired for not using preferred pronouns. Do you ever think that there is a scenario where you should just use whatever the preferred pronoun is in order to stay in a position and have a positive impact? Or is there just a line that you shouldn't cross, in your opinion?
In my opinion, though, don't do it, because if you don't have your principles, what do you have? I would start making preparations to get out, or maybe be innovative and think about collaborating with other Christian educators, and setting up Christian schools, and that's where my mind would go. And I think I wouldn't want to. I never really wanted to create a fuss for the sake of it. At my previous school, if teachers are in a similar position, I would just try and have an open conversation with the leadership and say, look, I'm a Christian teacher. Is there a way that we could accommodate my Christian faith? I can't go along with this. A conversation like that would, in the first instance, and I'd imagine a lot of people would not get to the point that I got to. And I never went to seek out the obviously if you go to seek these things out, you can quickly find them, and there's always things to confront people on and so on. But I would try and keep the peace, and but at the end of the day, if your peace doesn't settle, then move on, and dust off your feet. And so a few thoughts there. Have a conversation. There are Christian ministries that can support you in writing letters to the school and things like that. But I think in the very first instance, just try and be open. I think also hold your tongue at times. If for example, like I remember in the teacher training when I was back at probably 10 years ago now, 10, 12 years ago, they were making comments about, affirm it, like LGBT. Even then, it was like something that, oh yeah, well, this happens, and just ignore it in the schools. And I think at the time I could have kicked up a fuss. Just choose your moments, I'd say, but without going against, like, it's very difficult. I think we have to be led by the Holy Spirit, those of us that are Christian. Because God has a plan. So, he might want you one place or not. So, but those are some thoughts.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's like you're not looking for a battle. You're not trying to like wait for somebody to say something so you could pounce. But sometimes the battle comes to your doorstep. And at that point, you have to stand on your principles. That sounds like what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's a great summation. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I guess one of the last questions I'll ask you, and we may have already touched on this, but what do you wish the other side, whatever you would consider the other side to be, what do you wish they understood about just your beliefs and your motivations for taking the stand that you did? Because I know a lot of people have probably misunderstood you. And what do you wish that they could understand?
Well, my life was really radically changed when I gave my life to Christ, and I turned from my old ways and started to follow God instead of following my own ways. And so I had never had bad intentions. I just wanted to serve and really to share with the community the transformation that had happened in my life. The forgiveness of God through Christ, and so it wasn't, that's really where I'm at. The core of my being is that. So in terms of, obviously I realize that they have their convictions. I think it's ironic, isn't it, that they're so ardent and strong-willed, and they expect me to not be ardent and strong-willed the other way. Of course I have a very strong conviction of my Christian faith and Christian principles, and no job or anything else for that matter will ever match up to that in my life. So those are some of my thoughts given your question, but obviously there are many things that might come to mind and things, but
I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I feel like one of my biggest passions on this topic is helping people understand that just because somebody disagrees with gender ideology doesn't make them hateful. It doesn't make them this evil, wicked person. Just the kind of words that are lobbed at people for simply having concern for other humans and seeing things differently due to their faith or their worldview. I just don't think it has to be this contentious, horrible explosion. I think if people just took the time to dialogue and listen and understand, they could say, I may disagree and see things differently, but I believe that you do have genuine love and concern for others. And it's like, if people were willing to do that, we could meet in the middle. But instead, there's just been this borderline totalitarian rule that says people have to only think one way and they can only speak one way and they can only do one thing. And I just think that that is such a toxic mindset, especially to those of us that would consider ourselves a part of the free world. It's like, what are we modeling? That, we condemn other countries for having certain laws that are oppressive, yet in the free world, people apparently are no longer allowed to have freedom of religion, freedom of convictions, freedom of political beliefs. And so I would just hope that anybody that has watched this interview could see that you have a heart full of love, not a heart full of hate, and that everything you've done has just been to be faithful to your beliefs, which you are entitled to. And so I just appreciate you being willing to come on here and talk to us. And audience, I appreciate you for sticking around and watching. And please, by all means, let us know in the comment section if you have any questions. I thank you in advance for being respectful with whatever you write. And I'm sure, Joshua would love to answer some questions in the comments as they pop up. So we appreciate you guys for watching, and we'll see everybody next time. Thank you so much.